I believe it is 2 o'clock, and I know they have fabulous 2 o'clock here in Washington, D.C. And I know the ladies have fabulous content to share with you. So I don't want to delay the start here. On the next slide, you'll just see a little bit about us. If you haven't joined one of our webinars before, we are the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. I am the director, Anna Beltran. We are the only federally funded National Technical Assistance Center on kinship families. We work with an array of systems at the state, county, city, tribal level, so government agencies and nonprofit organizations, large and small, faith-based organizations. We really just want to help anybody who wants to help the families. So we don't help the families directly, but we help you better support them. We do this through a number of ways, including no-cost individual assistance. So if you have any kind of question about how do I reach a caregiver, how do I start a support group, how do I get federal funding, reach out to us. There's a form here on the left-hand side of your screen where you can just click, and Shayla Bottoms, our technical assistance specialist, monitors that, and she will get back to you shortly. We also have a lot of webinars, including one that's coming up next week. So look out for those no-cost webinars, and then a really robust website with lots and lots of new resources, including resources that we just posted this week. And then finally, we work intensively in 3 jurisdictions, helping them cross bridge systems. So break down barriers for kinship families, because as we know, kinship families have to navigate lots of systems. There is no one kinship system. They have to go to education for the kids, healthcare, TANF if they want monthly assistance, maybe child welfare, maybe aging if they're of the age that qualifies them. So lots of systems that they have to navigate. And we are here to help all those systems and all those nonprofit organizations. It is my pleasure to kick off the webinar and turn it over. On the next slide, you will see our speakers today. Unfortunately, Dr. Ramona is unable to join us today, but you are going to hear from the other 3, Angela Tobin, Tamra Scott, Charlene Ingram, who are going to share all about their model, which has just been designated, the peer liaison part of it, as an exemplary kinship practice by those of us here at the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn over to you, Angela.
Hello, thank you all so much for being here today. I'm looking through the chat and see some familiar faces and just people from all over the country. So we're really excited to share, but we also hope to learn from you all as well. So please keep sharing in the chat. And we've been honored to receive that exemplary program from GU. As an introduction to my role on the team, I serve as the program implementation specialist for KinCarolina. I was previously the program manager. So we really worked hard together to start KinCarolina from scratch and to build up the peer liaison model. Again, Ramona couldn't be here today. She is the project lead for KinCarolina, and she brought a lot of her previous research and work with peer liaisons to this project. Tamra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Angela. Hello, everyone. My name is Tamra Scott. I am the service coordinator for KinCarolina. I have worked with kinship families in the child welfare system for over 20 years. So thank you. I'm glad to be here today, and I will pass it on to Ms. Charlene.
Sorry. Hello, everyone, and we're happy to be able to share some time with you. I'm Charlene Ingram. I'm currently a consulting team member with KinCarolina. Previous to that, I was affiliated with Child Welfare League of America and the Philadelphia Department of Human Services.
Thank you. Yes, we have a great team. Not all of them could be here today, but we'll show their pictures in a little bit. So it's definitely the work of a lot of people passionate about kinship care. And we're also very passionate about peer support. So that will be the focus of today's webinar. We use the term kinship peer liaison. You may have heard the term peer mentor. We consider them interchangeable, but it really describes that individual peer support provided and specifically within the context for kinship caregivers. We know this is very well used in other spaces, such as like substance use recovery, but what we found from our work is it's pretty new to kinship care. So we're just excited to share what we've learned along the way and why we believe in peer support. You can go to the next slide. So as our roadmap for today, we'll start with just an overview of the peer liaison role and some of the myths that we've had to overcome and some of the strengths that we've seen in peer support. We'll specifically talk about the KinCarolina program next, which we're implementing in South Carolina, and we'll bring out the peer liaison component specifically and talk about some lessons learned structures that we've put in place, supervision and coaching, and then we'll talk about a liaison curriculum. We'll preview one that we're putting together that can potentially be of support to other organizations in the future. So please do put your questions in the chat throughout, and there will be a Q&A after this. We'd love to hear from all of you. You can go to the next slide. What is a peer liaison? As a simple definition, it's just a mentor with lived experience that works one-on-one with the caregiver. What we love about this model is that it is flexible and there's lots of different types of supports that peer liaisons can provide. It's not just a one-size-fits-all or protocol development support or like something that's very specific, but we do really provide supports in a way that's culturally responsive and individualized in terms of emotional support, informational support, and connection to relevant resources. So these are just some of the ways that peer liaisons can provide support. We'll also show some specific tasks or activities that they do with their mentees later on in the presentation. You can go to the next slide. What we love about the peer liaison model is that can really help strengthen caregivers' knowledge, skills, capacity, and it addresses their well-being by just having that support system and that support person that understands in a different way with lived experience. And we really believe that a lot of times kinship caregivers fall between the cracks. And, providing supports for kids is very important, but we also have to remember that caregivers have to be okay and feel supported in order to thrive in their roles and do the best for the children in their care as well. So that's why we've specifically focused on caregiver peer liaisons. You can go to the next slide, please. These are actually some assumptions that we had to think about when deciding the peer liaison curriculum. And you all probably have come across these in your work too. So we'd be interested to hear from people if they've heard these assumptions or what their take is. Peer support is very unique. It is different from formal support in terms of, systems like the child welfare system or the legal system that provide those professional services. So it is important for us to recognize the place for both of these services, but really the place that peer support has. So some of the assumptions in this work is that we know caregivers face high stress and are navigating a lot of systems at once. And there is that emotional burden with caregiving. So it's both logistical, but it can be emotional as well. So just recognizing that we are serving a high needs population and what support can look like to really meet caregivers' needs in the way that they feel like supported. And we know that peer support and formal services play important roles, but they do offer different benefits. For example, a peer supporter can say, like, I can understand how you're feeling. I felt similarly when I first stepped into my role. Whereas a professional without lived experience may not be able to connect in that same way. And professionals have their strengths too. Some may believe that peer support models may not be the best course of action. There can actually be stigma against peer support. And some of this can just be linked to like cultural stigmas in society, but also not having the infrastructure or, payment processes in place to support peer support models. But we do have to recognize that it can be as powerful, sometimes if not more powerful, than professional support. And it's really those two supports coming together that can holistically serve caregivers. So you can go to the next slide. Here are our whys for peer support. So we'll go through 5 core reasons And I may go through these a little bit quickly, but you will have access to the slides afterwards. So feel free to read more in detail. We do know that lived experience is so powerful, and it can create like an automatic trust with caregivers. And in doing this work, especially in the field of peer support, I've seen that time and time again. As soon as a caregiver knows that someone has lived experience, it's almost like they get it in a different way, right? So it can create greater emotional safety, reduce fear of judgment, which we know can happen across systems, validating caregivers' experiences, and reducing isolation, which is huge in kinship care, where caregivers can just feel so alone on their journeys. You can go to the next slide, please. I love peer support because I feel like once you have the structures in place, which is very important to be intentional about, it can be practical, easy to implement, and true life guidance. It's practical because the mentors or the peer supporters have that lived experience and had to navigate, all these systems themselves. So it can be really helpful in service advocacy, service navigation, and also supporting families through complex family dynamics, and maybe managing conflicting emotions, because that is a large part of kinship care too, that often gets like untouched because people don't really know how to approach it, but it is important to have that emotional support as well. You can go to the next slide, please. And we know that it also can strengthen and empower caregivers for their own self-advocacy. And of course, this is what we want for each kinship family, for them to be their own advocates and to take the lead in guiding for the supports that they need and that are helpful to them. So peer supports can really serve as that role model to show what advocacy can look like and help increase caregiver confidence and self-advocacy as well. You can go to the next slide, please. We also know that peer support is culturally responsive. So this means that it can meet the needs of caregivers where they are from their cultural background, and culture can mean different things, right? It can mean ethnicity, race, region, location, language, and having that cultural responsiveness, again, can help with increasing trust, reducing stigma. It can be hard to ask for help and to go to different systems for help, but having someone that looks like you or sounds like you or you feel represented in can make it easier. And that can lead to improved engagement in kinship care. And I know that's a big topic. Like, we have these services, how do we get kinship families to show up and engage? We know peer support can help do that. And it can align with caregivers' family values and taking a collectivist approach in kinship care. You can go to the next slide, please. And then lowering barriers to engagement. So we know peer support can be flexible, and there may be like less red tape around these interventions. We purposefully leave the peer liaison role having certain flexibilities so it can best meet the needs of the caregivers that we're serving. So it may include like conversations outside of traditional work hours and feel less intimidating than formal clinical services. We do want to recognize, like, we are not providing therapy, and it's important to know what's part of that peer liaison role and what's not, but there is a therapeutic benefit to peer support, and sometimes this can feel less intimidating for caregivers to engage in. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a summary of what all of those slides said, backed by research, some of the benefits we see for peer support. Peer modeling is really big. So not just hearing about something, but learning by seeing someone else do a certain task, increase trust and engagement, decrease caregiver depression and increase social supports, increase knowledge and access to resources. And then we do know it's trauma-informed and a culturally responsive approach. Certainly more research needs to be done in the role of peer mentorship in kinship care. There's been a lot around support groups. So that's also why we're focusing on that aspect today as well. You can go to the next slide. And now I'll hand it over to Tamra, and we'll introduce you to the KinCarolina program, which we're currently implementing in South Carolina.
Thank you, Angela. So as we transition into this section, we're moving into the implementation side of the work. Up until now, we've talked about concepts and what practice looks like. And so now you'll see the team behind the work. This is where everything comes together. So our implementation, collaboration, and impact. This is our team where Ramona Denby-Brinson is over the program for KinCarolina. We also work with other collaborating resources and universities statewide as well. This collaboration strengthens the work by bringing in diverse perspectives, research, and real-world experience. It truly reflects a team approach to supporting kinship families on a larger scale. Next slide. Our project overview. KinCarolina is funded by the Duke Endowment, which supports our ability to provide supportive services in the Low Country and Richland regions at this time. We define disabilities broadly, and this includes developmental, behavioral, emotional, and health needs. Both formal and informal caregivers are eligible for the KinCarolina program. And importantly, a diagnosis is not required for families to qualify. Our goal is to reduce barriers and make support accessible to families who need it. Next. Our core belief is at the heart of this work. It's a simple belief. When caregivers are supported, we know that children do better. We focus on improving caregiver well-being, the knowledge, and the confidence. We know caregivers feel empowered, and it leads to better outcomes for children and families. And so we also understand that community connection is so important because it makes us feel like it takes a village. And that's something that we always like to say, it takes a village in this work. Next slide. So before we go deeper, we're going to show a short video. It's 8 minutes long, and it gives a powerful overview of the why we do this work. And it also highlights the real life experiences of our families and why this kind of support is so important. So as you watch, think about the impact of caregivers and their families. All right.
I think there's a sense of humility in kinship care. I think it's just what you would do if someone in your family, a child especially, didn't have a place to live, was going through something traumatic. Most people would probably take that child in and not need credit for it. But because of that, they're not getting the resources they need. They're not getting the services and payments and things that they deserve, probably because it's just assumed this is just what we do for our family. Kinship care is when a child's birth parents are not able to raise them for whatever reason. So another relative takes the child into their home and raises them as their guardian. I don't think a lot of people know the term kinship care. I think a lot of people do know kinship caregivers.
Throughout history, kinship care has always existed. We just always not have had the words for it or the supports for it.
And sometimes we have caregivers that don't even know that they're kinship caregivers.
My younger sister came to stay with me when I found out that she was pregnant. Within the first 2 months, I realized how much more of a struggle it was for her to care for this child. One day she just decided she had enough and I just took over. I never looked at it as the term kinship caregiver. That's a new term for me. I just felt like I needed to step in when I needed to step in.
KinCarolina is a comprehensive support program for kinship caregivers in the Midlands region of South Carolina who are raising children with disabilities or a special health care need. We define that really broadly because we don't want people to be excluded. They don't have to have a diagnosis, but the program is for the caregivers, and we offer 4 components. The first is peer supports, so they get a one-on-one peer liaison, so it's mentorship from someone who's already walked the walk. We have monthly trainings, and we have a series of 6 trainings, and all of those topics came out of a needs assessment we did prior to starting the program. So we tried to make sure it was what our caregivers really needed and wanted to learn about. And then the final component is financial. So we actually offer our participants $450 a month for 6 months, which is the length of our program.
It made a difference for me. It's helped me in a lot of ways, and I can't thank you enough.
They are really doing caregiver person-centered analysis and research and making sure that it's not just a one-time handout, but it is a continued support and that the children understand that there is a level of care that they're receiving and it's not just someone leaving them by the wayside.
My only daughter and her husband died 9 months apart.
and they left behind 6 children. It was a very challenging experience because here I am at 75 years old and starting all over again. I didn't know sometime we were going to get our next meal from. KinCarolina came in and gave hope because I've got a family that I didn't have before that in my situation helped.
I am a product of kinship care here in Columbia, South Carolina. I say that with a lot of endearment because I am proud of the fact that I was reared in the Black tradition of the extended family. And when I think about my upbringing, I'm reminded of my wonderful 14 years with my own biological mother, who passed away very suddenly. However, her 2 sisters worked with my father and stepped in as my other mothers. And so when I think about my mother, I'm always reminded of my biological mother, but I'm also reminded of my 2 aunts.
When you're kind of caring for someone, a lot of people don't understand that comes with a lot of weight.
Foster parents are planning this out. They're making the decision that they want to be foster parents. They are planning out their homes. They are taking the trainings. They're completing all their requirements. And so they know this is coming. Whereas kinship caregivers do not know this is coming most times. Children are often going into kinship care under traumatic circumstances. I mean, parental death, parental incarceration, substance use, homelessness, even military separation. I mean, there's so many things that could be traumatic to a young child and traumatic to that caregiver too. So I think they really need even more support because they're just going through a lot. And then they're expected to work miracles with no additional supports. I mean, it's really not fair.
You're having to make a decision, for that child, and you care for that child, and that's why people say yes. But on the other side of that yes is literally your entire life changes. You go home and now you're back in the house that was your house, but now that's the child's house too. So I think it just changes your day-to-day life so much. In kinship care, you don't have that time to prepare, and there's not even words for what that sacrifice is because it's truly like a day-by-day, hour-by-hour, breath-by-breath choice that caregivers make. And that one yes they made in the 20-minute decision, that's going to impact them for the rest of their lives.
Kinship families face a lot of challenges. They experience some increased financial hardship, increased parenting stress, decline in physical health, and more severe mental health issues. All this may contribute to worse outcomes of kinship caregivers and the children in kinship care. But fewer services are provided to them compared to their counterparts in foster care.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I've heard that saying before, and that's saying if there's problems with the birth parent, then there must be other problems with the family. It's kind of like a non-sensitive way of explaining generational trauma. What the apple doesn't fall far from the tree doesn't account for is the opportunity for growth and for healing. And what I've learned in working with kinship families is kinship care can literally happen to anyone. Anyone can be put in this position, and for the child to be able to stay with family and someone who loves them is such a strength to start with, and then just building from there.
The belief that children, particularly kids that become involved in the formal child and family system and experience maltreatment at the hands of their parents, that the source of that maltreatment must be a dysfunctional family where that dysfunction spreads throughout. Over the years, I've tried to put a spin on that, and we've proven with our research that families of origin are strong. They are willing to take in their relatives' children. And just because someone has experienced a hardship, it doesn't mean that we should judge an entire family. And in fact, we know that with support, the relative caregiver does a good job with these children.
Kinship care as a practice has evolved. 14 years ago, when I assumed custody of my niece and nephew, there were no liaisons. It was your DSS caseworker. Once the case was closed, you were left with the children and you had to fend for yourself.
Kin caregivers, they are very resilient. They want to provide the best care for their kids.
Let them know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that you're not in this alone. Looking at my niece and nephew with smiles on their faces. Even when they share that they miss their biological parents, having the conversations, having them live in a home where they have an opportunity to share what they feel, they have an opportunity to cry if they need to cry, and then there's an arm welcoming them, to hold them, to love them, and to remind them that everything is going to be okay.
Yes, and that was such a video sharing the love that we have for our families and the love we have for each other and our peer liaisons as well. And so today we're going to talk about the KinCarolina model. As you can see, there's several support, multiple layers that we have, but today our focus is going to focus on the peer liaison model. So this is where lived experience becomes a key support tool for our families. So our peer liaisons walk alongside caregivers, offering guidance and understanding and connection. And this model shows how shared experience can build trust and meaningful support. Next slide. So how do these supports work together? They work together to make sure the family we have informational sessions where we provide information and have someone come in talking about self-care, which is so important that we know, because if the caregiver is not okay, then you're not going to be okay. Peer liaisons with living experience, support groups where they have a safe space to share, financial stipends, in which helps the family as well financially. And so all this works together to make sure that the caregiver can seek evaluations, the caregiver can seek a diagnosis, and they also have that support. Next slide. Okay, KinCarolina is also a study of a randomized control trial. And so they can either be in the treatment group or the control group. And we'll talk about more of that coming up soon. Next slide. Okay, back to Angela.
Thank you, Tamra.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
so we are recruiting caregivers for KinCarolina currently. If you are in the South Carolina region, you can directly refer caregivers to us, or we have a screening form on our website that they can fill out. If you do know of organizations in South Carolina that would be good to connect to. We also love just making those local connections too. So we are currently recruiting caregivers. As we mentioned, it is a research study as well, but we do walk caregivers through this process in terms of what this means. And we're really doing that to build evidence so we can say that this is something that is evidence-based, maybe applied to the clearinghouse in the future. But we have tried to do it in a way that is still supportive to caregivers, and those in the control group still do receive some level of support. So yeah, we're excited to share about KinCarolina. And I just want to highlight how amazing our caregivers and peer liaisons are. So we're glad that you can meet some of them through that video that we showed as well. You can go to the next slide. So we'll zoom into the peer liaison role specifically. These are examples of how we've done things in KinCarolina, but also lessons that we've learned along the way. You can go to the next slide. Perfect. These are major categories for ways that peer liaisons can support mentees. Sometimes they're doing multiple of these at once, so it's not mutually exclusive, but we actually have these in the logs that peer liaisons complete, because they log all of the interactions with caregivers. So we do have some data around like which ones are used more, but it is important to have, those different ways that peer liaisons can show up for the caregivers and in a way that is best received by the caregivers. You can go to the next slide. So mentoring, of course, it's called a peer mentor. So this is a major part of the role. And it's really just making that connection and being that go-to person for the caregiver. So ways that peer liaisons connect with caregivers, they do general check-ins and follow-ups. And this is really like the bread and butter of the role. So this is what we see most commonly happening between caregivers and peer liaisons. For us, we do have a flexible model. So this can mean meeting in person, calling on the phone, texting, setting up a Zoom meeting, and meeting on Zoom. So there's different ways, and we always ask like the caregivers' communication preferences as well. And peer liaisons connect with their caregivers at least weekly. But then we've heard like caregivers start reaching out to peer liaisons too as they grow that relationship. They can provide strategies and supports regarding child's needs and behavior. This does come up a lot, and especially with the population that we're serving, it can be a lot to navigate. And then problem solving, which we always keep it caregiver led, and we provide training and motivational interviewing framework to help caregivers through that problem solving. Next slide, please. We have coaching and advocacy, and this is really important again for caregiver empowerment and self-efficacy, and even just knowing what their rights are. In navigating so many systems, like you don't know what you don't know. So peer liaisons having that lived experience can help explain to caregivers what their rights are in different situations and even what their experiences were with navigating systems. And we've had peer liaisons also accompany caregivers to meetings or appointments to be a support person or advocate with them. Next slide. Network building and socio-emotional support. Of course, that emotional support aspect is so key and so unique to that peer liaison role. And we've heard, like, you know, even if my situation can't change, if I'm going through a lot, just having someone to listen makes such a difference. And I can just share whatever's on my heart, whatever's on my mind without judgment. So that emotional support aspect is really big for our kinship caregivers. Also encouraging caregivers to participate in other program activities. As you saw, we do have other components of KinCarolina, so it's great to help carry over participation in other programs as well. And then they could attend a community event together and just help build networks in the community. Next slide, please. Information and referrals. So this means like navigating all of the different systems. So providing resources to caregivers. Also, we really do take a team approach. So coming to our team and saying like these resources would be helpful, and then we can share those with caregivers, connecting with other community agencies, and then referring caregivers to other team members. We do have a benefit specialist as well. So it really helps for making sure caregivers are supported and that we can provide other agencies or support services to them that they're not currently receiving. Next slide, please. And then last but definitely not least, self-care. Again, this always sometimes like falls between the cracks, not only for caregivers, but also in what we think of support for kinship care. So in modeling self-care, but also even going out in the community and doing activities together, it can really encourage caregivers to focus on themselves. One of our peer liaisons teaches like breathing activities if caregivers are interested in that. So we really have a focus on self-care too. Next slide, please. And it is also important to define what's outside of the role of a peer liaison, right? It only works well if it's serving the purpose that it's meant to serve. So we do provide training on this and share with our caregivers, like peer liaisons are not meant to provide specific legal or medical advice, therapy or mental health or professional interventions or crisis interventions. So if there is a crisis going on, this is where our larger team comes in too. But again, knowing the limits of the peer liaison role is as important as knowing what is part of it. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we'll shift to the peer liaison process and some structures and supports we've put in place, including supervision. So we have onboarding, which includes outreach and recruitment. So we've been finding peer liaisons. Having a structure in place is really important too. So we do have eligibility criteria for peer liaisons to be able to do the things they need to in their role. We have a formal application and interview process with our team, and even a decision-making scale that we use. Having the right people is so important because that's, their main therapeutic tool. And then we're sure to share any requirements or expectation up front in order to know that for them to know what they're getting into as well, and if they can commit to it. Next slide, please. Orientation and training. So we do provide a lot of onboarding, and I think this is key. We can't just expect lived experience and alone to be like the training. We need specific tools and strategies and protocols in place. So we have about a half to full day training when they're initially onboarded. And then we also have refresher trainings every year based on the needs of peer liaisons. So topics include like an overview of the program, therapeutic use of self, boundaries, and caregiver and family well-being, among many other topics. Next slide, please. And we also believe it's so important to compensate peer liaisons. We don't expect to work for free, nor should we expect that of caregivers. And again, this is a trauma-informed model. And so there's different ways you could do this, whether it's through a contract, and peer liaisons are compensated per family they work with or hourly, or if you have enough caregivers, you could take a salary model. But we believe that every peer liaison should receive compensation. So it is important to build that into funding grants when you're writing those for a peer liaison model, and just being transparent and timely about compensation with caregivers too. Next slide, please. We do have additional opportunities for peer liaison involvement, not only for peer liaisons to build different skills or be involved in different ways that they're interested, but also for us to learn from them and keep our model informed by lived experience. So they're able to participate in our advisory council, help with recruitment and outreach, co-lead some of our programming, including our support groups, and assist with hiring and onboarding new peer liaisons. And they do receive compensation for all of these activities too. Next slide. And I'll hand it over to Tamra to talk about our matching process.
Thank you, Angela. Our matching process is very intentional and relational. We want to make sure that our families feel safe, they feel trust, and a sustainable support, not just for the time they're in the program, for a duration, for life, if possible. So matching caregivers with peer liaisons, again, I keep saying this is very intentional. We also align on lived experiences, needs, and relational fit, trust, safety, connection from the start. We also consider cultural, community styles, and shared experiences. And a strong matching leads to stronger relationships and better outcomes. Next slide. And I will turn it over to Ms. Charlene.
Thank you, Tamra.
You're welcome.
When we think about supervision, we think about it from the perspective that it is an important process in implementation of services to address the needs of families, children, and youth, as well as achievement of organizational goals and staff, and in this case, peer liaison development. Although supervision relates to all organization or agency staff, KinCarolina focuses on peer liaison support and development. So I will share with you for a few minutes thoughts concerning the definition of supervision as related to the role of peer liaisons, supporting theoretical concepts and selected major functions of supervision, and also knowledge, method, and skill supportive of effective supervision. So we're going to this next slide, which has the definition of characteristics of supervision. And as you know, there are various definitions of supervision that may vary based on the profession and also the population that a specific profession serves. Many research articles focus on peer liaisons' role for individuals recovering from health, mental health, and substance use challenges. Supervision of peer liaisons providing support to kinship caregivers from the program perspective can be described as a collaborative process during which a peer liaison receives guidance and support in several ways. And those ways include personal learning and development, use of personal experience in understanding the experience of others, and also service delivery that is not just competent, but also ethical. In the next slide, I will share with you supporting theoretical concepts. There are theoretical concepts that help frame effective supervisory practice. We selected 5 that seem relevant and important in peer liaison supervision. That doesn't mean we don't appreciate and recognize the others. So I will go through the five and kind of give you some background on them, related to them. One is mutual respect and partnership development. And mutual respect is fundamental to building trust and creates an environment in which individuals feel valued, understood, and heard. It supports positive conflict resolution and also supports individual growth. There's six important principles of partnership, and I'll just highlight those quickly. They include everyone deserves respect. I think much of this will sound familiar to you, but everyone deserves respect. Everyone needs to be heard. Everyone has strengths. Partners share power. Partnership is a process, and judgments should be avoided and not made. The second one, parallel process and reciprocal learning. How a supervisor interacts with a supervisee can model how the supervisee, in this case, the peer liaison, should interact with individuals for whom they are providing support. And supervisors must be aware of their own reactions to model healthy interactions within the supervisory process. And lastly, in reciprocal learning, there is a mutual exchange of knowledge. In other words, everyone has something to share and to learn. None of us know everything, and we can learn from each other. The third, reflective supervision. In reflective supervision, the supervisor guides the supervisee's examination of his or her feelings and thoughts about interactions with the individual or family for whom they are providing services. And reflective supervision is collaborative, and it's a collaborative process between the supervisor and supervisee. It has some very positive outcomes. It can improve service delivery, staff retention, and be a guide for decision making. The fourth concept, self-assessment. Self-assessment involves critiquing one's work with a view toward gaining insight into achievements, but also areas for improvement. And it's an ongoing process. It should be considered an ongoing process. It's not once a month or once a year. It's ongoing, continuous process. And the fifth is supervision and coaching, the relationship between the two. Both are supportive. And coaching focuses on goal achievement and enhancement of performance. It supports individuals in achieving their goals and improving their skills. Coaching sometimes is viewed as one of the supervisory functions. And that can lead me to the next slide, which talks about supervisory functions. As you see there, there's six listed, or leadership, planning, organizing, coaching, supporting, and evaluating. And identification of supervisory functions sometimes includes more than the ones that we have selected that I'm going to speak about as most relevant to the supervision of peer liaisons. That doesn't mean that all six are not relevant, but there's three that seem especially relevant to peer liaison supervision. And one is leadership, because leadership involves self-knowledge, creative and critical thinking, effective communication, respect and inclusion, teamwork and collaboration. Coaching, which is a collaborative goal planning process, as previously mentioned, and it unlocks potential and can enhance performance. And lastly, supporting, and that can provide encouragement to peer liaison or someone working with families and children and youth. Effective supervision relies on knowledge, method, and skill. And in the next slide, talk about knowledge. And knowledge of all of the 5 previous topics that were mentioned is important. There are 2 themes on the list, 2 items, I'm sorry, on the list that stand out, the list that you're looking at, stand out because they sometimes do not receive enough attention. And they include understanding of adult learning and also secondary traumatic stress. And it is important to remember that adults are self-directed, goal-oriented, and draw on their own life experiences. And secondary traumatic stress is important to remember because a person may experience emotional distress after exposure to the traumatic experiences of others. So the peer liaison may experience some emotional distress based on the experience of the kinship, caregiver, and family. The next slide mentions method. And you can see there's critical thinking, active listening, respect and inclusion, seeking and obtaining feedback, and building trust. All the methods listed there are important and essential in effective supervision, and they're interrelated. So more than one of the methods may be implemented at the same time. Skills. Effective supervision depends on all of the skills listed there and how they are used. Especially relevant to peer liaison supervision are identifying and supporting the strengths of others and remembering the peer liaison has the experience of kin caregiving and appreciating the value of this is very important. And this has implications really for willingness to learn. We learn from each other, and that should be kept in mind. And then lastly, the last slide refers to self-awareness and accountability. So self-awareness is reflection of one's own behaviors, traits, beliefs, values, and feelings. And engaging in self-assessment is one way of developing self-awareness. So supervisor self-assessment is a tool for self-improvement and should be an ongoing process. It provides opportunity to reflect on how supervisory tasks have been performed. There are benefits of self-assessment, and I will end by sharing a few of those with you. Some of the benefits include identification of areas for strengthening supervisory and leadership skills, helps build and maintain relationships, identification of areas for professional enhancement, provides information for setting goals, and this last one is very important, understanding of one's impact on others. So it's understanding, the supervisor understanding his or her impact on the peer liaison. And with that, I will turn it over to Angela.
Next slide. I think this may be Tamra's.
That's okay. Just as Charlene said, we work together. It's a mutual respect with peer liaisons. And so real life practice peer liaison and caregiver dynamics. Again, we're navigating personalities and differences and differing perspectives on caregiving with professionalism and respect. Respect is so important. Caregivers often focus on immediate stability, while we emphasize long-term standards. That's so important. We want them to feel like they're a part of this process. Reflection allows us to shift from correction to curiosity and strengthen that trust and partnership where they feel safe to be able to talk to us. Effective peer supports requires discernment, knowing when to hold and when to fold, knowing when to guide, when to validate or step back, while maintaining empathy and professional boundaries. Next, and on to Angela.
Thank you. And I think such a big takeaway from what Charlene and Tamra shared is you can't just have, you know, a liaison and a caregiver and say, great, we have like a peer liaison program. No, it's really important to make sure you have the effective onboarding, training, and also like supervision structures in place that are sensitive to the needs of caregivers and peer liaison for success. I think where this model could not work is when those structures aren't in place and then everyone's kind of doing something different, or maybe they don't feel comfortable going to their supervisor if an issue comes up, or maybe there is stigma about lived experience in an organization. So implementing all of these larger structures and also having a set supervision model specific to lived experience for kinship caregivers is really important. And that's part of the reason that we're putting together the liaison model, which I'll talk about now. You can go to the next slide. So the liaison model is what we've called it, and it's called Together Harnessing Lived Experience Liaison Model. So again, we're really focusing on the liaison intervention and what we've learned. It integrates what we've learned from KinCarolina, but it's also putting together all of these materials and lessons into a model that other organizations could use in terms of their training if they're interested in starting a liaison model. The reason that we saw this is because we noticed in the community, we see like support group curriculums for kinship caregivers and trainings for kinship caregivers, but we haven't found a model specifically around how do you implement peer liaisons and how do you do it well. So the primary audience for this would be organizations or entities that serve kinship caregivers. And we are currently working on the curriculum. We don't have it completed yet. I think it's one of those things where you like have a list of what would be helpful, and then as you get into it, you find more things to add to it. But we are hoping that it can include materials and content for peer liaisons themselves, for those that would be training the peer liaisons, for the supervisors. Again, that's a really important role. And then it could also help family-facing professionals and community members and evaluators. So it's kind of a package for that's ready to implement, but also adaptable to different organizational needs. Some of the materials we're putting together include training content for the peer liaisons themselves, but also for the trainers and supervisors, a facilitator guide, virtual case studies, handouts, research publications, and much more. So we have our work cut out for us for sure. Next slide, please. And so these are the key components that we've identified for implementing a peer liaison model. Again, really having a strong training foundation for peer liaisons, both an onboarding and refresher trainings as well, and making these comprehensive and interactive. We require that our peer liaisons have a GED or high school degree. So that's how we write our training content to our peer liaisons. So it can be understandable to people from all different backgrounds. Also a train the trainer curriculum. So this includes training materials for the person that's leading the peer liaison training and also for the supervisor. And it's really a lot of how-to content and also include some of that self-assessment and self-reflection as well. And we are putting together a supervision and coaching model or a guide. And Charlene puts a lot of work into that. As you saw, she is very knowledgeable about supervision, but building a supervision or coaching model that's culturally responsive and trauma informed and can really meet the needs of kinship caregivers. We know like a hierarchical supervision compliance structure probably is not the best way to go in general, but especially with groups that have had trauma from different systems and might have felt unheard. So we really take a collaborative approach to supervision. And Tamra has done an amazing job at that as the supervisor to our peer liaisons. And then finally, a standards of practice. So this is all of the fun implementation, fidelity, and evaluation pieces to the peer liaison curriculum to see how it's being implemented and also if it's effective. And we've had to do a lot of that already, doing like a RCT trial to track our outcomes. So yeah, I know we fit a lot into a short amount of time. You can go to the next slide. But if you are interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to us to learn more about KinCarolina. Again, we do serve caregivers in the Midlands and Low Country of South Carolina. We do hope to expand statewide and potentially bring components of the peer liaison model elsewhere too. And there's other ways to stay in touch. I think someone just put it in the chat. So if you're interested at all, we would love to connect with you. And we want to know others who may be doing similar work or trying to get into this work as well.
Thank
Next
you
slide.
all so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you sharing your model with us and all the upcoming good things that you're getting ready to create. So we are dropping into the dropping a survey into the good grief, into the webinar so that you can answer a couple of questions so that we continue to create the best content for you, or at least we try to create the best content for you. And while you're answering that survey that Ro is going to drop in to the webinar, I'll let you know about a few other things here, which is that we do have a webinar coming up next week that features family resource centers, 6 models from around the country that are doing a variety of really interesting things for kinship families. On the next slide, you'll also see how to remain connected with us here at the network. We will put you on our newsletter list if you're not already on it. The newsletter comes out tomorrow and it's chock full of resources because I've seen a draft that our own Mari Weiss puts together. But anyway, that will be going out tomorrow and we will add you to the list unless you tell us not to, and then we won't. Also, please feel free to reach out for individual assistance through our short form. And as I mentioned, Shayla Bottoms, our technical assistance specialist, will get back to you. And then please follow our LinkedIn page. We keep we have a very active LinkedIn page with all things kinship, not just the things that we do here at the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network.